In the textbook, developmental, transitional, and situational crises throughout the lifespan. There's not a lot in this chapter, but I think the main thing is that this focuses on it's focused on change. And any type of change brings about anxiety. So even good change, even positive changes in our life brings about anxiety. So if somebody's getting married, or if somebody's having a child, or if somebody's starting a new job, that's really a positive thing, it's still stressful. It still creates anxiety. So, and changes that are not positive, that are often unexpected, create a larger amount of anxiety. If individuals have experienced larger crises in their past, or if those crises have resulted in trauma, if they experienced any type of abuse, their response to change, whether it be positive or negative, is accentuated. So they're going to have a greater reaction to any kind of change that occurs. If you think about change, it heightens our awareness. It kicks in our emotional and cognitive response system so that we can handle the change, so that we can address what's different in our lives. And if you think about it, what we've been learning so far, if somebody's already stuck in that fight or flight mode, you can imagine how heightened the response to other changes in their life might be, even positive changes. So they may react to something positively that is positive in their life in a negative way, because it's more difficult to deal with that heightened anxiety due to change. So really, one of the things that this chapter focuses on is basically different kinds of change. So the textbook keeps talking a little more about the relational process. We're not quite at just the therapeutic stage yet. But I do want to highlight a few things. The term mutual empathy. So many times, I found with clients who have experienced abuse or trauma, I try to be extremely empathic, but they don't know how to respond to that. And the only thing that I know to do, we'll find in our other readings tonight, in the other book, is I also learned, as the writer did in The Body Keeps the Score, that it's our inclination, it's our natural inclination to reason with people, which is kind of CBT, REBT. Individuals have irrational thought processes. Our response to trauma is often irrational. But it is not a time in therapy to really focus on reasoning first. Yes, we do have to eventually talk about the irrational thought processes that may negatively be impacting their lives, but it's usually not the first thing that we go to. And really, building the trusting relationship We have to do that with every client, but it's so significant with individuals who have experienced trauma. It's almost, we can't move forward until we've established a trusting foundation. And so I believe the way to do that is through mutual empathy. Now, I begin by, providing accurate empathic understanding, acceptance, unconditional positive regard, all those Rogerian concepts, and being genuine myself. That's the foundation for empathy. It's also active listening and being present for the other individual, and focusing, I believe, on trust and feelings instead of the cognitive distortions that they may be demonstrating. And so I realize when that trusting relationship is being established, when they begin returning empathy or responding appropriately to my empathy. So, yeah, I think that's one of the most important things. I think that, let's see, I underlined a sentence here. Mutual empathy demonstrates our understanding of a person in their own context. Knowing you really matter to another human being can break the bonds of exclusion and private suffering. And if we think about it, if a person experienced abuse as a child, and that's what they learned growing up, they have feelings of helplessness, of worthlessness, of self-blame, of isolation, extreme loneliness, and internal suffering. And simply knowing that another person actually cares about their well-being may be something new. So the next step in the process, and this doesn't happen all at once, but I believe if somebody is able to experience genuine empathy and acknowledges that somebody else cares about their well-being, then just a little bit of risk can be taken because they feel as though they're safe in that counseling context. And so they allow themselves to become just a little vulnerable. Okay, and that's a huge risk. I said little, but it feels like a huge risk, letting themselves become a little vulnerable in that safe counseling session. They talk about life and identity. One of the things that struck me was this phrase, becoming successful or happiness does not protect people from deep distress. So we have all kinds of examples of very successful people, people that we think should be happy, but they're still experiencing deep emotional distress in their lives. In fact, how many times do we hear on the news about somebody who's very successful and you would think they're living the ideal dream, but they commit suicide, or they're in the hospital, or something like that. Many times we don't realize this. I like to say that no matter who we meet, everybody that we come in contact with is dealing with some struggle in their life, even though they may seem like, oh, how you doing? Oh, my life's great. I'm fine. Everything's good. But everybody has some struggle. Crisis of identity development. So, crises. So, you know all the developmental models. Got Erickson and some other models. I kind of like Erickson myself, but all of these models seem to be so organized and orderly, but it's not really a linear process. Erickson recognized this in his later books that, you can always go back and resolve an issue in an earlier stage of development. It may be more cyclical than straightforward. And it's the same with the grieving process. A lot of the grief and loss models seem so orderly, but none of them really are. You can't just say, oh, I'm in this stage now, because the next day you may be back to the previous stage. It's not an orderly experience, and it doesn't have to be. It's not meant to be. We just have to recognize that and accept it. One that I've had a lot of experience with is parenting children with disabilities, because I worked with children with disabilities for about 10 years, and talking with their parents. There's a process that parents go through who have children with disabilities that, first there's kind of denial. It's almost a process of loss. But there's also complicated shame attached to it, because they don't want to admit these feelings because this is their child. They should simply love their child, and I believe they do. But there's also a sense of loss, and that loss I really identify as a loss of what might have been. So everybody has dreams for their kids, and yet, no child's perfect, and yet, in a sense, they are. Every child has a struggle. I don't think that makes them any less perfect. So, there's this process of learning to accept one's child for who they are wherever they're at in life, and loving that child for who they are, finding joy and appreciating who they are. And, I think that adds a whole new dimension to the relationship. I think struggles add meaning to life. Overcoming obstacles adds meaning to our lives, deeper understanding. So, some of the most meaningful experiences I've ever had in my life were working with children with disabilities. And it was never the kind, like most people might assume that, oh, did you find meaning because you helped that child? No, I found meaning because that child helped me, because I learned something about life from that child. Yeah, but there is kind of overcoming that sense of what could have been. instead of enjoying what is. You know, parent education, when a child's born, they don't send you home with a handbook from the hospital. And one of my favorite phrases is that at some point, each of us realizes that as we were growing up as a child, so were our parents. So our parents were learning to be parents as we were growing up as children. And we all know learning processes are imperfect. We all make mistakes. Everybody gets something wrong, but we learn from that experience. We grow from that experience. And of course, the third or fourth child, hey, they got it made. They figured everything out. Another interesting thing that they brought up was not only job loss, but also they called it retirement, but I would call it career change at later ages. And we're seeing so much more of that now, that individuals place a lot of their identity in whatever their career is, even if the career is being a caregiver, raising kids, or being a caregiver to a parent, or whatever it might be. That's still one's career. And but for many different reasons, you know, these careers that we identified self with end. And it could be kids grow up and move out. It could be parents pass away, or could be new technology, or whatever, changes in the economy. But I find that even at retirement age, a lot of individuals have thought about retirement their whole life, and they're finally at that point, but they end their career, everything's positive. The highest rate of heart attacks occurs 1 year after retirement. This could be for a number of different reasons. Could be health reasons. Everybody is at an older age at that point, so they may be dealing with more physical reasons for that. But I think there's also this experience of trying to find one's identity after working in some type of career for 20 or 30 years. Many times people don't expect to experience financial worries after retirement. They plan for it, and yet the economy has changed. Things are more expensive. They might have more bills, like medical bills or something like that. They might have more emergencies. And their savings doesn't last as long as they had anticipated. Many times, an individual might expect to spend their retirement checking things off their bucket list with a significant other, but that significant other is no longer there for whatever reason. Or people may have combined their identity with their career, and now they're really not sure who they are anymore. Or they buy that recreational vehicle and they travel across America and back. Well, what am I going to do the next 5 years of my life? I've done the exploring. So I think that is a neglected area of counseling and one that is really needed right now in our current economic times. We have more elderly than ever before. If you live in the Pittsburgh area, Pittsburgh has the second largest population of people over 65 in the country. The first area, of course, is Florida. But we do have a very high population. So these changes not only create crises, but they exacerbate issues that we have not yet dealt with. So wondering if anybody had any examples of any of these. Anybody know anybody or have any experiences or clients who are going through any of these things? I remember my dad retired from the military, and then he went to work for the government. And when he retired at 65, he didn't know what to do with himself. So he had originally gone to college, which was like 40 years before, to become a teacher. But at that time, he couldn't support a family being a teacher, maybe not even now. But he was able to go back and be a long-term substitute teacher and kind of fulfill that original dream after he retired. And his whole mood changed when he began doing that. First, he was depressed after retirement and had a lot of anxiety. But then when he started teaching, I saw him become a lot happier and fulfilled. And I never heard him talk about work before, but he would always talk about students, and it was like K through 12, you know. So I think he ended up where he really wanted to be. But I think even if somebody is financially secure in their retirement and they travel and do the things they wanted to do, after a couple years, they've kind of checked those things off and are looking for meaning once again. And even though they may not have to go back to work, there's plenty of volunteer activities. Now they have the time to contribute and to help others. And it's the perfect time to volunteer. So that's definitely an option. So I think career counseling in later stages of life is particularly important right now in society. Any questions or comments about any of those topics? All right.